Thank you, Senator Mackenzie. Senator Back.
Thank you, Acting Deputy President, and I'm delighted to stand to support the Simplifying Student Payments Bill of 2017 and to associate myself with the comments of my colleague Senator Mackenzie and recognise those who she has named as having been instrumental over time, backbenchers and ministers, but also to acknowledge the work that she has done in her capacity as chair of the committee. You know, Acting Deputy President, what this really shows is that persistence lasts, because I think I came into this place in early 2009 and it was one of the first issues, with my background coming from a rural and regional area in Western Australia and having been involved in rural and regional primary, secondary and particularly tertiary education, seen as an area of such difficulty and one that so urgently needed addressing. And it's fantastic to be here today to actually see the support across the chamber, and I do acknowledge the comments of Senator Polley, in particular in her introductory comments with regard to the bill. There's a couple of points I may take issue with Senator Polley towards the conclusion of her contribution. But, Acting Deputy President, it has long been the case that students from rural, regional and remote Australia have been significantly disadvantaged when it comes to students from the capital and major regional cities. And, Acting Deputy President, you were, as I recall, a member of a Senate committee which I chaired back in 2012, looking at teaching and learning, why students weren't learning and why teachers couldn't teach. And it was in that report that we identified, of course, rural and regional students as one more of the disadvantaged groups of children in our society, those of Indigenous background, those with disabilities, those from low socioeconomic backgrounds, and we identified in that report very strongly that students from rural, regional and remote Australia needed to be included in the key pillars of groups who were disadvantaged. Acting Deputy President, I pick up, coming from WA, the difference in the academic standards, for example, of young people who may have been from the beginning of their school through to Year 6 in regional, rural and remote areas, and the cohort splits. One group stay in a rural community, the others go on, for example, to city schools, very often boarding schools. And by Year 12 you see a remarkable difference in the education outcomes of those students. In comparison with their peers in a city-based school, you don't see a difference in the academic outcomes of those Year 12 students, whether they come from city, urban, or whether they come from rural and remote areas. But when you speak to examiners and invigilators and others, they will tell you immediately those who have come from rural, remote or regional schools because of the lower education standards and outcomes. And it is the case in this country. There is no reason why there should be disadvantage based on that element. As Senator Mackenzie has outlined, the difference in cost for a student to attend, for example, a city university or a TAFE or higher skills development location. It's not just the cost in dollar terms, as we know, those of us who had to go away from our homes for tertiary education. It's not just the dollar cost, it is the emotional cost, it is the support base that's needed. It's the fact that a 17, 18-year-old doesn't have their own home to come back to at the end of a day. They are either in private rental accommodation or university college or similar if their parents can afford it. So we know, and I know from my own personal experience, the added cost. But at least if we can address the financial cost, we are going a long way. It was in June of last year that I recall putting out a release congratulating the coalition, should we be successful in government, that we would implement many of the strategies that we see in place today. And it's most important that people understand that the reduction from 18 months to 14 months for a student to prove independence after leaving school is of critical importance. 14 months, of course, by the time you take the month of December in the year they leave school, and in the month of January, 13 months later, you get the gap year and you get the 2 added months. So in other words, the net loss to a student in leaving school but not going immediately into university is only 1 year, 1 gap year, during which time, of course, they should work. And those of us, particularly those of us who have been associated with education in the agricultural space, and I would be interested in Senator Seawitt's comments as an agricultural scientist. If a person leaving school has 1 year away before they start university, there is a higher proportion of them actually going on to uni. Those who must wait a 2-year period, which is effectively what 18 months causes, the dropout rate or the non-attendance rate is vastly greater, and that's something we cannot afford. And I say that through you, Acting Deputy President, to the young people in the student gallery who are watching now. Whatever you do, should the opportunity present, keep to the minimum the time interval between you leaving school and when you start your further studies, because the distraction after certainly 1 year, the likelihood of you returning to university or higher education studies 2 years later is of course reduced significantly. And I say to those who might be interested in this process, it is so important that students do get on and start their program. If they have a gap year, if they work during that gap year, then they've obviously got the financial independence, they've got the wherewithal, they've got that added year of maturity. I agree with all those things. But what I find great difficulty in, and what this addresses, is that we will not see that loss of 2 years. But the other point that must always, of course, be borne in mind is that whole question of student aspiration. We're talking so much now, and again through you, Acting Deputy President, I appeal to the young people who are in the gallery watching this discussion. We're talking about STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. Of itself, STEM is only a stepping stone to a phenomenal future for the young people of Australia, who must not see STEM as just the end point. It is the familiarity of the knowledge of science and technology and engineering and mathematics that will see you young people, through you, Acting Deputy President, embrace that phenomenal spectrum that is ahead of you. 3D printing and everything that goes with 3D printing. The advances we're seeing already in modern medicine. The announcements of the government, more than $100 billion in new shipbuilding, naval shipbuilding, which is going to require skills across the board at the certificate level, the diploma level, the degree level, the post-degree level, that will see you all not only achieve your ambitions, not only get yourselves into good long-term high-paying jobs, but ultimately your own children will be there too, and you will be so employable around the world. Because everything we're talking about now is not confined to Australia, it is international. And we are not doing these things purely for employment and opportunity in Australia, we are doing it for our role in the world. So again, I say that the initiatives that have been taken in these changes that we see today, simplifying student payments, allow rural and regional students to participate now also in those opportunities that we will see this country is on the cusp of. Just one example, Acting Deputy President. As a result of the work of Professor Fiona Woods after the horrific Bali bombings, and Fiona Woods in Perth was able, with her team, to develop technology where they could take the skin of people in a laboratory environment, create a spray of that skin, which could then be sprayed back onto the horrific burns of burn victims. Just imagine this, in 5 years' time, with the advances we're making in science and technology, if a person needs a kidney transplant, they will take the tissue of the good kidney, they will produce it in the laboratory, and with 3D printing, they will be able to put back into that patient a new kidney that is that person's own kidney. Don't worry about needing a donor, their own kidney. And I say to the groups in 3 areas in this chamber, through you, Acting Deputy President, it is you who will be the people making those advances. And I just think the excitement, if you take nothing else away from your time to Canberra and the Parliament House, take away the excitement of the opportunities that exist for you. Acting Deputy President, I know there are others wanting to speak. I know it is not the time to be talking penalty rates today, and I won't take issue with it, except, Senator Polly, through you, Acting Deputy President, if I can make 2 observations. The first, on the weekend I spoke to a person in Perth who owns clothing stores in outer metropolitan areas, not in the CBD, and this person said to me, with these changes I will open those stores on a Sunday where I cannot afford to open them now. So that's one observation I would make. And the other one, going back to 2009, I think it was the first committee that I sat in. I can't remember whether Senator Polly was a member. I do remember Senator Billick being there. And I just ask you to reflect on this, that up till then, before the changes that were introduced by the then Labor government, pharmacy students could on a weekend be involved in the preparing of Webster packs and blister packs for patients in nursing homes and hospitals, etc. Not only did they have the opportunity to be employed on a weekend, to earn some extra income on a weekend, but of course the value to them as pharmacy students to be working with pharmaceuticals, to be learning about them, to be discussing the relativities of whether or not this what was compatible with that medication, was completely lost simply because the necessity to pay those penalty rates was such that the employers were saying, well, we can have this work done Monday to Friday by unskilled or semi-skilled people, but unfortunately we can't employ those pharmacy students on a weekend, particularly a Sunday, because of the penalty rates. Today is not the day to be talking about these matters, but since it has been raised, I just make 2 very simple observations. In conclusion, Acting Deputy President, I am delighted to see the work that's been done by the backbench, that's been done by committees, that's been undertaken by the ministers, to see us today able to agree to the amendments, the Simplifying Student Payments Bill 2017, and to recognise again that that barrier to education by rural and regional students will be in some way broken down. And the best evidence of it is that whilst people from rural and regional Australia represent a quarter of the general community, less than 20% are represented at Australian universities. And from our own state of Western Australia, that figure would be much lower. I thank the Chamber for the opportunity.